Have you ever felt, even for a moment, that something in the world just doesn't fit? An almost physical sensation? A shiver that arises from nowhere, as if all of reality were breathing out of sync? Perhaps it happened during a moment of silence, when the noise of routines dissolves and thought approaches the edge of comprehension. In those brief seconds, everything seems to lose substance. People, cities, meanings, even time. As if an invisible crack were opening in the fabric of reality, and through it, something deeper, more authentic, and also more frightening could be glimpsed. What would happen if this crack grew? If suddenly the world we know began to unravel before our eyes, revealing that nothing we call true has been anything more than a well-orchestrated simulation orchestrated by our own unconsciousness. Some call this moment the collapse of the illusion of awakening. Others prefer the older term, revelation. Carl Jung said that human beings find themselves not in comfort, but in confrontation. That what we fear most within ourselves is, paradoxically, what we most need to integrate. Perhaps the malaise we feel in the face of modern life, this sense of artificiality, of constant noise, of soullessness, is not a mistake of the world, but the call of the psyche trying to tear us from our collective slumber. The dream of normality repeats itself like a mantra: work, consume, believe. And when something within us whispers that something is wrong, we quickly seek to drown out the voice with distractions. Yet the silence persists, and deep down we know this restlessness is the password to awakening. But what is awakening? The word sounds beautiful, almost heroic. But who truly wants to open their eyes? Because awakening is not just intellectually understanding a truth. It is feeling the weight and cost of seeing what was hidden. It is allowing the light of consciousness to invade the dark corners of our being, exposing what we would rather ignore. Jung warned, enlightenment comes not by imagining figures of light, but by making darkness conscious. And that is where the true terror begins. Realizing that the enemy we so feared was never outside, but always within. The world we build may be merely an expanded projection of our own shadows. Entire cities are built on the fear of loneliness. Religions are born from the dread of the unknown. The economy feeds on collective anxiety, and each individual, silently, sustains the machinery that imprisons them with their desire for control. We are simultaneously victims and creators of the labyrinth. Illusion is not an imposed prison. It is a repeated choice, made unconsciously, every day. By choosing the safety of routine over the risk of inner freedom, we reinforce the invisible bars that surround us. Somewhere in this web, the inevitable question arises: what if the world isn't real as we perceive it? Not in the fanciful sense of a technological simulation, but as a living metaphor for human unconsciousness itself. Perhaps the reality we experience is a distorted mirror of what we deny within ourselves. Everything we reject, fear, pain, guilt, powerlessness, takes form and returns to haunt us through the events of the world. Jung saw this mechanism clearly. The unconscious projects, and we call this projection destiny. Every collective tragedy, every social collapse, perhaps is simply the human psyche trying to balance itself, seeking to reintegrate that which has been expelled from consciousness. Yet a paradox holds us captive. We want to understand, but we fear what we will discover. We want freedom, but we take refuge in the comfortable servitude of the known. Thus, awakening becomes a painful, almost sacrificial process. We must die to the world of appearances to be born into inner truth, and no one can do it for us. No system, religion, or doctrine replaces the individual plunge into one's own abyss. Jung compared this movement to the myth of the descent into the underworld. The hero must face the dragon of the unconscious, not to destroy it, but to reconcile with it. What is the dragon if not the very life force we imprison, transformed into a threat? We live in times when the collective seems on the brink of exhaustion. The speed at which we produce and discard information is proportional to the void that silently grows. The culture of distraction is the modern opium, and few realize that the more we connect externally, the further we distance ourselves from our soul. We are educated to fear the void, but it is in it that consciousness is rebuilt. When all certainties fade, only the essential remains, the encounter with who we are beyond roles and masks, and it is precisely there that fear transforms into strength. Jung said that the process of individuation is solitary and inevitable. Each human being is called to become the center of their own mandala, the balance between light and shadow. But this call is often drowned out by the voice of the world. Being authentic today is almost an act of rebellion. The system doesn't need awakened individuals. It needs predictable components. Thus, anyone who begins to question what is real soon becomes an outsider, a misfit. And yet it is only through this strangeness that reality reveals itself. Awakening is not a glorious event, but a slow crumbling of illusions. The first symptom of this process is doubt. It emerges like a subtle virus that corrupts the blind trust in what seemed unshakable. The second is fear, not the irrational fear of external danger, but the dread of losing the identity the ego has constructed. Finally, silence arrives, a silence that is not empty, but pregnant with meaning. At this point, the seeker begins to realize that the external world reflects their inner state, that others are mirrors, and that every conflict, every loss, every pain is a coded message from the soul. There is something deeply moving about this path. The more one says goodbye to illusions, the lonelier one becomes, but also the freer. What once seemed solid begins to dissolve. Relationships change, desires lose strength, social goals fade. A new perspective emerges, one that transcends appearances and seeks the essence. And it is in this perspective that true awakening begins to shine, timid but undeniable. There is no longer a need for ready-made answers. There is only the acceptance of mystery. Reality is not something to be controlled, but something to be experienced in its symbolic fullness. Carl Jung stated that the encounter with the self is like the encounter with God. But God, here, is not an external figure. It is the principle that dwells at the center of the being. The self is the nucleus that unifies all polarities, the point at which consciousness and the unconscious meet. Approaching it is, therefore, a dangerous process, for it requires the dissolution of the ego, the symbolic death of what we believed ourselves to be. The ego screams, resists, invents distractions. It fears the abyss, but the abyss is precisely the portal of transformation. And then comes the question none of us can avoid. Are we ready to see what has always been before us? Because once you see, there is no going back. Awakening is not a romantic choice. It is an irreversible rupture. Consciousness, once expanded, does not contract again. What has been revealed remains burning, demanding coherence, asking us to live according to what we know. From that point on, every lie becomes burdensome. Every pretense becomes unbearable. The price of lucidity is solitude, but the reward is freedom. And yet there is something beautiful in this journey, because in crossing the desert of disillusionment, we discover that reality was never the problem. The problem was always our blindness. The world remains the same. What changes is our perspective. And when our perspective changes, everything changes. What was once a prison reveals itself as a path. What was once a shadow reveals itself as a source. What once seemed like death reveals itself as birth. Jung would say that awakening is the moment when the individual ceases to be dominated by their complexes and begins to dialogue with them. It is the moment when the human being becomes whole. But totality is not the end. It is only the beginning of a new way of living, because once awakened, the individual realizes that their personal transformation is intrinsically linked to the transformation of the world, that there is no inside and outside, subject and object, self and other. There is only the continuous flow of life recognizing itself. And it is in this recognition that true reality begins to emerge. Not an idealized reality, but a reality full of meaning. Perhaps the world really is falling apart. Perhaps the chaos we see is not the end, but the beginning of something new. Jung would remind us that all destruction is also a birth. The old must die so that the new can emerge. And this is the movement we are experiencing, the twilight of a civilization that has lost touch with its soul, and the dawn of a new consciousness that is beginning to emerge silently, still timidly, but inevitably. The call has already been made, the choice is before us, and the question echoes like an ancient whisper: are we ready to awaken? Because once the rift opens, it never closes, and what crosses over to the other side is never the same again. There comes a night when everything seems to fall apart. It's not a visible catastrophe, but an exhaustion that comes from within, as if something within us has given up pretending. The clock ticks, but time stands still. The body performs automatic functions, but the soul remains silent. You try to distract yourself, Turn on the television, open the internet, chat about trivialities, but the void remains there, silent, insistent, almost compassionate. It doesn't want punishment, it wants presence. It's the psyche knocking on the door, begging you to stop running. Carl Jung said that everything that isn't made conscious returns as destiny, and that's exactly what we feel when the world suddenly begins to return to us everything we've avoided seeing. It's curious how illusion disguises itself as normality. It's in the job that doesn't inspire, but pays the bills. In the relationship that's lost its luster, but remains because it's stable. In the conversations that don't touch the soul, but fill the silence. We constantly pile up justifications like bricks, building the cave in which we later complain of being trapped. There's no villain in this story, only the fear of the unknown, the fear of being authentic. Because being authentic means losing control over how the world sees us. And that, for the ego, is almost a death sentence. Everyday life is unconsciousness's most efficient disguise. You wake up, shower, get ready, leave the house. The traffic is the same, the voices are the same. The expressions of people on public transportation are the same. There's something hypnotic about this flow. It's an invisible choreography that everyone knows, but no one has rehearsed. Each of us carries within us a silent anguish, a longing for something we can't name. And yet, we keep dancing to the rhythm the system imposes, because to stop would be to acknowledge the absurd. But one day, something goes wrong. It could be a sudden loss, a dismissal, a betrayal, an illness, or simply a moment when the soul decides it can no longer pretend. Then, everything that seemed solid begins to unravel. The ground shakes, and at first we think we're going crazy. But it's not madness, it's the real finally beginning to reveal itself. Jung would call this moment a confrontation with the shadow. The shadow is everything we deny within ourselves. Fear, jealousy, anger, desire, fragility. And when it surfaces, it's not to destroy, but to heal. I knew a woman who lived exactly this. She had an exemplary life, an admired career, a close-knit family, travel, recognition. But at night, when she lay down to sleep, she cried for no reason. Once, during a conversation, she told me, "I feel as if my soul was left somewhere along the way and I'm still walking without it." That phrase never left my mind. It wasn't depression, it was separation. What hurt wasn't the absence of something, but the distance between who she was and who she pretended to be. One day, without warning, she collapsed. And in that collapse, she began to be reborn. She lost friends, status, certainties, but she found silence. And in the silence, she found herself again. Jung believed that the process of individuation begins precisely when everything we've sustained collapses. Because as long as life is organized, the ego remains in control. Only when structures break down does the unconscious have room to speak. What we call a crisis is actually the beginning of a dialogue with the self. The soul tries to lead us to a new inner order, but to do so, it must break the old one. And the frightened ego interprets this process as an end, when in fact, it is a beginning. Most people, upon feeling the first crack, rush to fill it. They seek quick answers, new relationships, courses, trips, anything that will fill the hole. But the void doesn't want to be filled. It wants to be heard, because the void is the womb of the new. When we stop resisting, something silent begins to move. At first, it's just discomfort. Then comes a gentle clarity, and finally, understanding. There's no need to chase the truth. It's the truth that comes to us when we stop running from it. Imagine the moment you find yourself alone, with nothing to support the identity you've built. It's frightening, but also liberating. Suddenly, there are no more external expectations to meet. What remains is only what is true. Jung said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who one truly is. Few have the courage to embrace this privilege because it exacts the price of solitude. But it is in this solitude that the soul flourishes. Awakening isn't a spectacle. It's a slow, silent inner revolution. It happens when you choose to tell the truth, even if it hurts. When you decide to stop acting, even if it leaves you vulnerable. When you realize there's no salvation outside, because the world you see is merely a reflection of the world you carry within. And as this understanding deepens, something reorganizes. Your gaze changes. The air seems denser, the colors more vivid, the people more transparent. It's as if the veil begins to tear, not all at once but thread by thread. And then, one day, you wake up and feel something different. The world remains the same, but you no longer move the same way. Haste loses its meaning. Words gain weight. The little things, the wind, the sound of rain, a look, become symbols of something greater. The soul begins to speak again, and this time, you listen. Awakening is not the end of the search. It is the beginning of true life, and it is at this point that the mystery deepens. Because, upon awakening, we discover that we are not merely observers of reality, we are its co-creators. Everything we think, feel, and choose shapes the world around us. What we called destiny may be just the sum of our unconscious incongruities. With each authentic choice, a new line of reality is drawn, and then we understand that freedom was never out there. It was always here, in the heart you choose to see. But there's a silent warning that accompanies this discovery. Once you awaken, there's no going back. The cave remains, but it no longer offers shelter. The comfort of lies loses its flavor. The world remains the same, but you don't. And this is how the true journey begins. When awakening ceases to be an idea and becomes a way of life, the tables have turned, the illusion has been shattered, and now the only choice remains. Continue pretending or cross the rift, because the call never stops, and the next step is already looming on the horizon. There are truths that don't arrive with thunder, but with a silence so profound, it disarms. They are those that aren't announced with mystical revelations, but insinuate themselves in ordinary gestures, in the look of someone who no longer believes, in the moment when laughter sounds forced, in the emptiness that sets in after a victory that should bring joy. It is in these banal moments that reality infiltrates, breaking the surface of the everyday. Choosing the truth is, above all, losing illusions, losing the comfort of ready-made explanations, losing innocence. And yet, there is something sacred in this loss, because only when everything collapses does space for the new emerge. Carl Jung said that the process of individuation requires the old to die, so that the self can be born, and the stubborn soul is unafraid to destroy what is false to preserve what is authentic. But what do we really gain from watching? Clarity isn't always sweet. Sometimes it's bittersweet, like awakening from a dream that seemed perfect. Knowing too much can be a burden. Anyone who has ever loved and suddenly realized it was over understands this. Anyone who discovered that their admiration for someone was merely a projection, or that the ideal they'd sustained their entire life was fragile, also understands. The moment of awakening rarely brings relief. It tears. But there's a violent beauty in this tear. It reveals the truth that has always been there, patiently waiting for us to be ready to face it. And then the question arises that cuts us to the core. Do we really want to know? Do we want the truth, even when it tears away everything we believed we were? Because there's a point where lucidity hurts so much that forgetting seems tempting. The human mind has an admirable ability to deceive itself. We construct stories, justifications, bland versions of ourselves to endure reality. We do this for the love of survival. But the soul, that silent witness that inhabits us, knows when we've lied to ourselves, and one day it demands payment. Sometimes in the form of anguish, sometimes as apathy. Emptiness isn't the absence of meaning, it's the echo of a truth that was ignored. Jung said that whatever is not brought to consciousness returns as destiny, and perhaps that's why so many repeat the same mistakes, encounter the same unhealthy loves, fall into the same abysses, not through bad luck, but through unconscious fidelity to their own shadow. Have you ever wondered how many of your choices were truly free? How many were born of authentic will? And how many were driven by fear, need, or a desire for approval? There comes a moment when the individual realizes that freedom lies not in doing what they want, but in understanding why they want it. Self-knowledge is not a comfortable path, it is a minefield. Each step can detonate a belief, each discovery can dismantle an identity, but it is on this unstable ground that true life begins. The ego, desperate, tries to negotiate with the truth, tries to preserve what remains of control, but the truth is incorruptible. It doesn't want your comfort, it wants your wholeness. Imagine the moment you finally see the invisible gears that drive your actions, the repetitive pattern, the fear that disguises love, the anger that hides fragility. Everything illuminates, and for a second, the entire world seems suspended. You see yourself, not as you would like, but as you are. And this moment is, paradoxically, both liberating and devastating. liberating because it reveals the path to authenticity, devastating because it shows the price of awareness. How many times do we wish to erase what we know, to return to comfortable ignorance, to the sweetness of illusion? There's a silent character inside each of us, a voice whispering, "Go back. It was easier before." It's the part Jung would call the regressive shadow, the fragment that fears growth. It longs to return to the cave, to the dream, to solace. And sometimes we give in to it. We repeat old habits. We get tangled up in old relationships. We pretend not to see what we already know. But the soul doesn't forget. And the more we try to erase it, the stronger the call becomes. It's curious, the truth never screams. It waits. It watches from afar, while we insist on masking the pain. And then, when everything seems stable, it reappears, disguised as a banal conversation, an accident, a simple gesture. It doesn't come to punish, but to remind. Truth is patient as fate. It may take a lifetime, but it always finds its way back. Have you ever felt that feedback? That feeling that life is trying to tell you something, but you don't yet understand the language? Some people awaken suddenly, as if struck by lightning. Others awaken gradually, through falls and resurgences. But what unites them all is the same breaking point, the moment they realize the lie is unsustainable. Illusion is tiring, burdensome. It requires constant maintenance. Truth, though arid, releases energy. After pain comes fresh air, and with it, lucidity. Not the cold lucidity of the intellect, but the living lucidity of the accepting heart. Awakening is accepting the world without guarantees. It's walking without the comfort of narratives, guided only by intuition. Jung said that he who looks outside dreams, he who looks inside awakens. But awakening isn't glorious. It's a birth. The body trembles. The mind resists. The soul insists. It's the moment when the human being, stripped of their masks, confronts the essential, what remains when everything else falls away. And then a question echoes, simple, yet devastating. What in you is still true? Because that's what awakening demands. Purification. Everything false falls away. Relationships that were once convenient dissolve. Certainties disintegrate. Ambitions lose their luster. What remains, however small, is real. And the real has a strange power. It doesn't need to be beautiful to be sacred. Truth is not a refuge. It's a journey. It doesn't promise comfort, but meaning. And when we finally accept it, the world begins to change. Not because it changes completely, but because our perspective is no longer the same. And the awakened perspective, once lit, never goes out. Are you willing to pay the price of seeing? Because once light penetrates the cracks, sleep becomes impossible. Awakening is irreversible. And the next step, though unknown, already awaits you. There comes a point in the journey when silence begins to speak. It's when the noise of distractions is no longer enough, when the glow of screens no longer reaches the soul, and something within us stirs, demanding presence. Subtle at first, a slight restlessness, a sense of displacement in the world. You look around and realize that everything seems the same, but it's no longer the same. The coffee tastes the same, the work continues, the friends are there, but there's an invisible distance between what you live and what you feel. It's in this interval that awakening matures. Jung said that the human soul is like a fertile field where the unconscious sows symbols. And when these symbols germinate, no lie can smother them. A man once recounted how, after losing everything he owned in a fire, he felt for the first time what it was like to be alive. There was no more home, no documents, no material memories, nothing. And yet he described a profound, almost sacred relief. It was as if the fire had taken away everything that was false, he said. It's strange to think that destruction can reveal meaning, but perhaps truth only reveals itself when the superfluous burns away. When the shell is gone, the essential emerges, naked and inevitable. The pain of loss is often life's way of restoring what is real. But why do we need to lose in order to see? Why do human beings only approach the truth when the illusion becomes unsustainable? A lie is comfortable because it adapts to our wounds. It is molded to fit precisely in the space that hurts the most. It is the voice that whispers, "Everything is okay," when nothing is. It is the filter that makes the unbearable bearable. Our entire society is built on small, collective lies. That success brings happiness, that love is enough without conscience, that time heals what has never been faced. We grow up feeding fictions that protect us, but that also keep us trapped. Carl Jung called this the golden prison of the persona, the mask we wear to be accepted, but which, little by little, devours us. A curious experiment conducted by psychologists in the 1960s showed how the human mind adapts to lies. People were placed in a room and instructed to repeat statements they knew to be false. After some time, they began to believe them. The brain, unable to tolerate the dissonance between what it feels and what it says, adjusted its perception. And this is also true in everyday life. The more we repeat our own illusions, the more we become convinced of them. We pretend to be fine until we believe it, but the body knows, the soul knows. The price of denial is a disease of the soul, which manifests itself in subtle forms. Anxiety, apathy, exhaustion, and emptiness that has no name. Have you ever felt that exhaustion? That point where your body is present but your spirit seems distant? Truth doesn't arrive like a thunderclap. It seeps through the cracks. Sometimes it's an unexpected conversation, a look that dismantles you, an old memory that resurfaces for no reason. Other times it comes in the form of loss, a love that ends, a job that no longer makes sense, a routine that becomes unbearable. At first, everything seems to fall apart, but collapse is the prelude to reconstruction. Jung asserted that the unconscious destroys only what impedes growth. Therefore, when something falls apart, it is life trying to reorganize the truth within us. In a village in rural Norway, there's an ancient custom. When someone suffers a great loss, the community gathers in silence around the house. No one speaks, no one consoles. They just stay there, present, for hours. They believe that pain needs to breathe before it can be touched. And when the silence ends, grief begins to transform into strength. Perhaps this is the secret we've forgotten, allowing the truth to have its time, without trying to numb it. But are we prepared to hear what silence reveals? We live in an age that fears pause. Leisure is seen as failure, silence as a threat. Yet it is precisely in the pause that reality manifests itself. Between one thought and another, there is a space where consciousness expands. It is there that the soul speaks, and what it says is rarely pleasant. It confronts us with what we avoid: lack of purpose, fear of death, guilt, unresolved love. But it is also there that we discover that what hurts is also what heals. Jung saw the psyche as a self-regulating system. That which sickens also contains the medicine. The wound is the portal. A woman once said that after a marriage ended, she spent days in absolute silence. No television, no music, no conversation. On the third day, she began to hear a sound she believed came from outside, a constant, almost musical hum. Then she realized the sound was coming from within. It was the noise of a mind beginning to reorganize itself. The pain had opened up space for listening. In the emptiness, she found a part of herself that had been forgotten. What if what we call a crisis was just the soul's way of asking to be heard? The truth is demanding, but not cruel. It doesn't come to hurt, but to restore wholeness. Even suffering has a purpose when accepted consciously. Jung said that the unconscious doesn't want to destroy the ego, only to integrate it into the whole. The problem is that the ego fears losing control. It clings to known pain, preferring imprisonment to uncertainty. That's why awakening is a process, not an event. Every truth accepted is a layer of lies that falls away, and every lie that falls brings us closer to something more alive. There are reports of people who, in extreme situations, experienced an inexplicable expansion of consciousness. A mountain climber who nearly fell off a cliff described seeing his entire life in an instant. A woman in a coma claimed to have felt the universe pulsate within her. Scientists call it a borderline experience. Jung would call it an encounter with the self, the instant when life and death touch, revealing that both are facets of the same totality. But do we need to reach the edge of the abyss to understand the value of the real? Perhaps awakening is not about achieving something extraordinary, but about perceiving the extraordinary in the simple. The touch of the wind, the sound of breathing, the present moment. When the gaze is purified, the ordinary becomes sacred. Truth is not hidden in distant mountains or enlightened masters. It is in the small, daily revelations we ignore. It is in sincere gestures, in repentance, in forgiveness. And when we begin to live from this perception, everything changes. Not because the world changes, but because we stop resisting life as it is. The illusion slowly dies, and reality settles in like a new language we must learn to speak. Every word, every choice, every silence takes on weight. What once seemed banal becomes a revelation, and suddenly we understand that awakening is not a distant destination, but a state of presence renewed with every breath. And then, faced with this new clarity, a final question arises. What will you do with what you already know? Because seeing is irreversible, and consciousness, once ignited, demands coherence. The world continues to call with its promises of comfort, but there's something inside you that's no longer satisfied. Awakening becomes inevitable, and the journey now is to live according to the truth, even when it hurts, even when it disarms, even when it demands everything. There's a night when the world seems suspended. The air weighs differently, voices fall silent, and something invisible approaches, not as a threat, but as a revelation. It's this kind of night when masks fall of their own accord. The city light reflects in the windows, but there's not enough brightness to hide the tiredness in our eyes. Everything that once served as a distraction now feels false, repetitive, colorless. And then the question we've tried to avoid for so long arises, without warning, without mercy. What are we really doing here? Not here in this physical space, but here, in this state of consciousness, in this way of living, in this endless loop of wanting and not knowing what. Carl Jung said that the psyche is wise, that even in our escapes, it prepares our return, that there is something within us that never sleeps, that observes, that notes every false gesture and every cowardly silence, waiting for the right moment to confront us. And that moment always arrives. Sometimes it comes as a loss, other times as an absurd coincidence that seems written by an invisible author. What we call chance may simply be the unconscious's discreet way of nudging us back onto our axis. One morning, a man wakes up for no apparent reason. The clock reads 3:33. He doesn't believe in symbols, but he senses something unsettling about that number. He gets up and walks around the house. Everything seems normal, but there's a feeling someone is watching him, and, in a way, someone is watching himself. His reflection in the window stares back at him with a painful sincerity. It's in that gaze that reality reveals itself. No mystical voice, no supernatural sign, just him, before him. That's where the dismantling begins. From that moment on, he knows he can no longer pretend. Have you ever experienced a moment like this? When silence itself becomes unbearable because it starts telling you the truth? Truth is not the enemy of illusion. They dance together. Illusion protects us until we are ready. Truth arrives when it is inevitable. But there comes a point when continuing to sleep is more difficult than waking up. It is when the body becomes ill without apparent cause, when the days repeat themselves without pleasure, when something within demands change, and the mind responds with fear. Fear is the last guardian of the cave. It whispers, "Stay, it's safer here." But the soul, insistent, responds, "Leave even if it hurts." Jung saw fear as a sign of transition. It arises not to paralyze us, but to warn us that the boundary of the known has been reached. The new always begins with a tremor. Just as birth is preceded by pain, awakening is preceded by doubt, and doubt is the space where consciousness breathes. The problem is that we have learned to hate this space. We seek certainties, formulas, answers, when the essential can only be discovered in the unknown. A woman reported that for years, she lived a seemingly perfect life, marriage, children, stability, until one day, for no reason, she began to feel a constant sadness, a feeling that nothing made sense. She sought therapy, medication, distractions, but nothing changed. One day in a silent session, the psychologist simply asked, "Are you living the life you wanted, or the life expected of you?" She didn't answer. She cried. And in that cry, everything began to unravel. Her marriage, her job, her certainties. It seemed like a tragedy, but it was a birth. Years later, she would say, "That question destroyed my life, but it gave me a soul." How many of your choices were born of freedom, and how many were born of fear of disappointment? Truth needs no adornment. When it arrives naked, and that's why it's frightening. It offers no guarantees, no promise of the future, only presence. Presence is unbearable for those who live on autopilot. To be truly present is to feel everything, the heaviness, the emptiness, the joy, the discomfort, and feeling everything is an act of courage. It's easier to keep sleeping, swiping the screen, repeating the same speech, seeking approval. But there comes a point where the body begins to reject the false. The voice falters, sleep eludes us, laughter seems rehearsed. It's the soul saying, enough. An unlikely, almost miraculous event can arise in these moments of exhaustion. A stranger on the street who says something simple, but it resonates for days. A dream that seems more real than waking. A forgotten memory that resurfaces and changes the course of life. Jung called this synchronicity, the meaningful coincidence between the internal and the external. It's not magic, it's language. The world speaks when we begin to listen. Every detail becomes a symbol. A noise on the radio, a phrase in a book, a repeated number. All become messages from something greater trying to communicate with us. But are we attentive enough to notice the signs? The greatest obstacle to awakening is haste. We want to reach peace, clarity, and enlightenment quickly. But consciousness is patient. It doesn't open by force. It blossoms when we cease resistance. Life, however chaotic it may seem, is always trying to align us with our true axis. And each time we ignore this call, the chaos increases, until there's no other choice but to listen. This is how the unconscious works. It creates the discomfort necessary for the self to surrender to the truth. Now imagine you're standing before a door. Behind it, the unknown. You don't know what you'll find, but you know you can no longer stay where you are. Your heart races, your hands tremble, and yet you turn the handle. As you cross the threshold, something changes. Not outside, but inside. Fear transforms into impulse, doubt into strength, emptiness into space for the new. This is the precise moment of awakening. There are no fireworks, no glory. There is only the awareness of being alive. But the living, once awakened, bears a responsibility. Seeing implies acting. There is no returning to the comfort of blindness once one sees. And this is where many retreat, because living consciously is a burden that demands daily coherence. One must align actions with truth, words with feelings, choices with souls. And this coherence comes at a price: loneliness. Few can bear to live with someone who no longer deals in lies. Carl Jung would say this is the point of individuation, when the human being becomes complete, not by isolating themselves, but by finding within themselves the center they previously sought outside. The world remains chaotic, but chaos no longer frightens, because now there is an internal axis that sustains them. The storm comes, but it does not destroy. And then, something unexpected happens. The fear disappears, not because the danger is gone, but because perception has changed. Reality remains unpredictable, but you no longer need to control it. Control gives way to trust, and trust reveals meaning. Everything that happened, the falls, the losses, the pain, was just the necessary path to get here. The tension that once tore you apart now transforms into rhythm. Life, once fragmented, begins to sound like a single melody, and you finally understand that awakening was not the end of the journey, but the beginning of a new way of being. What if everything we've experienced so far was just the prologue? What if the true awakening was yet to come? Because there is something stirring beneath the surface, a deeper, more vast call, whispering between the cracks of consciousness. The veil hasn't completely fallen, it's just begun to tear, and what awaits on the other side is the theme of the next crossing, the integration of what has been seen with what is yet to be born. And it is there, at this silent turning point, that the destiny of the awakened being begins to reveal itself. It was dawn when the silence seemed to become thicker than the air. The house was asleep, but inside me something remained awake, restless, burning. I sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, not daring to turn on the light. I had just seen a truth I didn't want to see, the kind that doesn't ask permission, that simply pierces your chest and dismantles everything. I remember thinking, with a calm sadness, why did I need to know this? Why didn't I stay quiet pretending everything was fine? That night, I realized it wasn't just a symbolic scene. It was awakening in its most naked form, and I also realized that every search for truth begins with the loss of innocence. There is no way to see reality without burning away illusions, but it is in this inner fire that the first sign of freedom is born. The world remains the same, the streets, the people, the commitments, but something in the gaze changes forever. Lies no longer fit, emptiness is no longer disguised. Awakening doesn't bring certainties, it brings awareness. And awareness doesn't ask you to flee from the world, but to return to it in a different way. with your eyes open, your heart exposed, with the courage to be whole. Carl Jung said that no one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making darkness conscious. And that is precisely what awakening demands, to pierce the shadow until you find the spark that was hidden at the center of your being. If you've made it this far, it's because you've also heard the call. Maybe you can't explain it in words. Maybe it began as a nuisance, a question, a deep weariness of repetition. It doesn't matter what form it took. The important thing is that you didn't ignore it. And that, in itself, is a silent victory. Because the greatest act of courage isn't defying the world. It's defying your own blindness. It's looking within even when everything around you insists you stay asleep. But what to do now that you've seen the crack in the wall? How to transform insight into practice, reflection into life? The answer lies in everyday life. Awakening doesn't just happen in extraordinary moments. It manifests in daily choices. It begins when you decide not to lie to yourself, when you feel anger and choose to understand what's behind it instead of repressing it, when you listen to someone without rushing to respond, when you do something simple, like taking a deep breath before reacting, and realize there's space between impulse and action. In that small space, consciousness is born. Jung said that individuation is not an escape from the world, but an integration. It's experiencing the world without getting lost in it. Every time you act authentically, a part of your psyche reorganizes. Every time you choose reality over comfort, the unconscious becomes a little more enlightened. There is no secret ritual, no sacred manual. There is only presence. Being present is the most difficult and most revolutionary exercise there is. Ask yourself now, how many of your daily decisions are guided by fear? How many conversations are avoided because they might confront you? How often do you put off what you know needs to change? Awakening begins when these questions stop being threats and become compasses. Because there is no freedom without responsibility. Seeing what's wrong is only the first step. The second is acting in accordance with what you've seen. And perhaps this is the greatest paradox. The path to truth is not to abandon the world, but to inhabit it consciously. The same routine, the same streets, the same faces. Everything can transform when our perspective changes. Work ceases to be an obligation and becomes an expression. Relationships cease to be dependency and become encounters. Time ceases to be a burden and becomes space. Life, finally, becomes yours. I'm reminded of a Jungian quote that resonates as both a farewell and an invitation. What we resist persists. What we accept transforms. It's the same with life. Embrace chaos. Embrace fear. Even embrace emptiness. Because it's on this unstable ground that meaning germinates. The soul doesn't seek perfection. It seeks wholeness. And wholeness only emerges when you embrace all your parts, including those you'd rather not see. Now close your eyes for a moment. Breathe deeply. Imagine that each inhale brings back what is yours. Your strength, your clarity, your courage. And each exhale takes away what no longer belongs to you. Your roles, your guilt, your expectations. Do this whenever the world seems overwhelming. This is how you get back on track. Through conscious breathing, through remembering that you are greater than everything that happens. Awakening is not a mystical event. It's a practice. It's waking up each morning and deciding not to live on autopilot. It's remembering amidst the chaos that there is still a silent center within you, and that it is from this center that true life springs. You don't need to be a hero. You don't need to save the world. Just don't betray what you already know. Just choose the truth, one gesture at a time. And if fear comes, and it will, remember, it's not a sign of weakness, but of passage. Every birth brings pain, but after it comes the first breath, and with it, the beginning of a new life. You've already crossed the veil. You've seen the other side. Now it's time to live from that perspective. May every decision be a testament to your lucidity. May every word reflect what your heart truly feels. May every silence be filled with meaning. And if something inside you was moved by this script, if any word lit a spark, don't let it go out. Share that light. Talk about what you felt, even if anonymously. Write in the comments what your red pill was. That moment when your perception transformed. Your story might awaken someone who's still sleeping. If this video touched you, please leave a like. This isn't just a mechanical gesture. It's a way of saying, I saw, I felt, I awakened. And if you want to continue walking with me through this symbolic labyrinth of consciousness, subscribe to the channel. Here, each word is a seed, each reflection is a door, and each video is an attempt to remember who we are before the masks. Because truth is not the end of the road, it's the beginning of freedom. See you on the other side.